The CNN studios in Atlanta had never hosted a more anticipated confrontation than what was about to unfold on this humid July evening. The network had managed to secure an unprecedented joint appearance by former President Donald Trump and former President Barack Obama for what was being billed as a historic debate about American economic policy, presidential leadership, and the future of the nation's financial system. The occasion was CNN's special primetime series on economic leadership and national prosperity. But the underlying tension between the two men had already generated massive media attention and public interest that extended far beyond typical economic policy discussions. The stakes were particularly high because Trump had specifically requested this debate as an opportunity to defend his economic record and challenge what he characterized as Obama's failed policies that had weakened American prosperity and global competitiveness. Trump arrived at the CNN studios with his characteristic swagger and confidence, accompanied by a team of economic advisors and media handlers who had spent weeks preparing him for what they saw as a crucial opportunity to rehabilitate his reputation on economic issues following years of legal troubles and business scandals. His talking points had been carefully crafted to focus on stock market performance during his presidency, job creation numbers, and his claims about negotiating better trade deals than any previous administration. His demeanor projected the same combination of bravado and grievance that had characterized his political career, showing no recognition of the mounting legal challenges and financial investigations that had begun to expose serious questions about his business practices and wealth sources. Obama entered the studio with the dignified bearing and intellectual precision that had characterized his presidency and post-presidential activities. But those who knew him well might have noticed an unusual intensity in his preparation and the presence of several thick folders and electronic devices that seemed excessive for a standard economic policy debate. His research team had been conducting extensive analysis of Trump's financial records and business relationships for months, uncovering patterns of suspicious activity that went far beyond typical business disputes and revealed what appeared to be systematic money laundering operations spanning multiple decades. He had initially planned to keep the discussion focused on policy differences and competing economic philosophies, but the scope of financial crimes his team had documented had convinced him that the American people deserved to understand the true nature of Trump's business empire and its impact on national security. The first segment of the debate proceeded along expected lines, with moderator Anderson Cooper facilitating a discussion about tax policy, regulatory approaches, and the role of government in promoting economic growth. Trump delivered his standard talking points about deregulation, tax cuts, and America First trade policies with the polish of someone who had been making the same arguments for years. His responses carried the same mixture of self-congratulation and criticism of his predecessors that had defined his political messaging, focusing particularly on stock market gains and employment statistics that he attributed entirely to his own policies while dismissing any economic progress during the Obama administration. Obama's initial responses were measured and substantive, focusing on the importance of sustainable economic growth, financial regulation, and the need for economic policies that benefited all Americans rather than just wealthy individuals and corporations. His expertise in economic policy and his experience with both economic crisis and recovery were evident in every answer, providing detailed analysis of complex issues while maintaining the clarity and communication skills that had made him such an effective political leader. His responses consistently emphasized the importance of ethical business practices and transparent financial systems in maintaining public trust and economic stability. The atmosphere began to shift when Cooper asked about banking regulation and the role of financial institutions in promoting responsible economic growth versus enabling speculation and fraud. Obama's response focused on the lessons learned from the 2008 financial crisis and the importance of robust oversight to prevent the kind of reckless behavior that had devastated the economy and cost millions of Americans their homes and jobs. His analysis was thorough and well-documented, drawing on specific examples of regulatory failures and the reforms implemented during his administration to prevent similar crises. Trump's response revealed the arrogance and contempt for financial regulation that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The banking industry doesn't need more government interference and bureaucratic red tape, he declared with the confidence of someone who had spent decades believing himself above legal accountability. What it needs is smart business people who understand how to make deals and create wealth, not career politicians who have never built anything or created a single job. The Obama administration's banking regulations destroyed American competitiveness and made it impossible for successful entrepreneurs to access the capital they needed to grow their businesses and create jobs for hardworking Americans. But Trump wasn't finished with his attack on banking regulation and Obama's economic policies. His next statement would prove to be the catalyst for one of the most devastating financial exposures in American political history. Barack spent 8 years implementing socialist policies that weakened American banks and made it impossible for legitimate businesses to get the financing they needed. He continued, his voice rising with the righteous indignation that had characterized his political rallies for years. Meanwhile, he allowed corrupt foreign banks and money laundering operations to flourish while attacking successful American businesses that were actually creating wealth and jobs. His administration was a complete disaster for anyone who wanted to build legitimate businesses and contribute to American prosperity. The studio fell silent at Trump's direct accusation that Obama had enabled money laundering while attacking legitimate businesses, crossing lines of both factual accuracy and institutional respect that had governed presidential discourse throughout American history. Cooper appeared genuinely surprised by the boldness of Trump's accusations, while production staff throughout the studio recognized they were witnessing something that would fundamentally change the nature of the debate and potentially American political discourse more broadly. Obama's response was calm, but carried an undercurrent that suggested he was shifting into a more aggressive mode that would prove devastating for Trump's carefully constructed public persona. Donald, I find your accusations about money laundering and legitimate business practices particularly interesting, given the context of your own business relationships and financial activities over the past 30 years. Since you've raised questions about banking regulation and financial crimes, perhaps we should examine those concepts more closely as they apply to your own business empire and your relationship with Deutsche Bank specifically. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew what appeared to be an extensive file folder marked with official federal seals and multiple classification stamps. The sight of such extensive documentation immediately changed the atmosphere in the studio, as everyone present understood that Obama had come prepared for a confrontation that went far beyond standard policy disagreements. I'm particularly curious about your definition of legitimate business and money laundering, Donald, especially when it comes to your 30-year relationship with Deutsche Bank and the $50 billion in suspicious transactions that have been flowing through your organization during that time. Trump's confident expression flickered as he sensed that something was seriously wrong, but his decades of escaping accountability through legal maneuvering and media manipulation had made him believe he was untouchable regardless of what accusations might be leveled against him. I don't know what you think you're doing, Barack, but everyone knows that my business empire is completely legitimate and that all the investigations into my finances have been politically motivated witch hunts designed to destroy a successful president who threatened the corrupt establishment. Have they? Obama opened the file and removed the first section of documents, which appear to be banking records and financial analyses marked with multiple federal agency seals. Donald, what you're about to see is documentation from a joint investigation conducted by the FBI, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the Southern District of New York that has been examining your financial activities and those of the Trump Organization for the past 8 years. The investigation has uncovered what federal prosecutors describe as the largest and most sophisticated money laundering operation in American history. The silence in the CNN studio was complete as the implications of a federal money laundering investigation targeting Trump became clear. Obama was not just making political accusations. He was presenting official federal documentation suggesting that Trump had been under extensive financial investigation for criminal activity spanning multiple decades. The magnitude of such allegations, if substantiated, would represent not just individual criminal behavior, but systematic financial fraud that had apparently been operating at massive scale for years. The investigation documented in this file began in 2015 when FinCEN analysts noticed unusual patterns in suspicious activity reports filed by multiple banks regarding Trump Organization transactions. Obama continued, holding up charts and graphs that showed financial flows and analysis patterns. What they discovered was a complex network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and correspondent banking relationships that appeared designed specifically to obscure the sources and destinations of billions of dollars in transactions over a 30-year period. But Obama was just beginning his systematic destruction of Trump's business credibility and exposure of what appeared to be decades-long criminal enterprise masquerading as legitimate business activity. He produced additional sections of the federal file that contained detailed financial analysis and documentation showing the scope and sophistication of the alleged money laundering operations. The centerpiece of this money laundering network was your relationship with Deutsche Bank, which, according to federal investigators, served as the primary financial institution for processing and legitimizing funds from Russian organized crime, Mexican drug cartels, and various other criminal enterprises that needed to convert illegal proceeds into seemingly legitimate business investments. Trump's attempts to respond were increasingly desperate as the evidence mounted against him. This is completely fabricated deep state propaganda designed to destroy someone who built the greatest business empire in American history and threatened their corrupt system with actual success and job creation. These documents are obviously fake and represent the kind of politically motivated persecution that I've been fighting against throughout my career. Actually, Donald, these documents have been verified by multiple federal agencies and international banking authorities, Obama replied calmly, producing what appear to be bank records and transaction analyses from Deutsche Bank itself. The documentation includes internal Deutsche Bank compliance reports, whistleblower statements from bank employees, and detailed transaction records showing how your organization served as a conduit for laundering money from criminal sources around the world. He held up specific transaction records that showed millions of dollars flowing through Trump Organization accounts. This particular transaction from March of 2019 shows $127 million being transferred from a shell company controlled by Russian organized crime figures through Deutsche Bank correspondent accounts in a Trump Organization real estate investments. According to federal analysis, this transaction was part of a larger $2.3 billion money laundering operation that used Trump properties as vehicles for converting criminal proceeds into legitimate assets. The studio erupted in gasps and horrified whispers as the magnitude of the alleged money laundering operations became clear. If the documents were authentic, they suggested that Trump's business empire had been functioning essentially as a criminal enterprise designed to launder money for international organized crime groups, representing a level of financial criminality that would dwarf any previous American political scandal. But Obama's revelations were just beginning, and his next disclosure would expose the true scope of what federal investigators had uncovered about Trump's financial activities. He produced additional banking records that showed the systematic nature of the money laundering operations and their integration into Trump's legitimate business activities. The federal investigation identified over 15,000 individual transactions over 30 years that exhibited characteristics consistent with money laundering activities, Obama announced to the stunned studio audience. The total volume of suspicious funds processed through Trump Organization accounts exceeds $50 billion, making this the largest money laundering case in American law enforcement history. Trump sat motionless in his chair, his face cycling through emotions of shock, fear, and what appeared to be recognition that his carefully hidden financial crimes were being exposed with the full weight of federal law enforcement documentation. The bluster and confidence that had characterized his public persona for decades had completely evaporated, replaced by the look of someone watching his entire life's work revealed as an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The money laundering network operated through a sophisticated system of real estate transactions, casino operations, and licensing deals that were designed to obscure the criminal origins of the funds while providing Trump Organization with legitimate appearing revenue streams. Obama continued, reading from what appeared to be federal prosecutor summaries. Criminal organizations would provide funds through various front companies and shell corporations. Trump Organization would use those funds for property acquisitions or development projects, and the completed projects would then be sold or operated in ways that return clean money to the criminal organizations while providing Trump Organization with substantial fees and profits. The revelation that Trump's real estate empire had been essentially functioning as a massive money laundering operation for international criminal organizations represented not just individual criminal behavior, but a systematic betrayal of American financial laws and national security interests. The implications for every property transaction, casino operation, and licensing deal in Trump's business history were staggering and would require years of federal investigation to fully unravel. But Obama's most devastating revelation was still to come. He accessed what appeared to be internal communications between Trump and Deutsche Bank officials that had been obtained through federal subpoenas and search warrants. These communications, obtained through proper legal channels during the federal investigation, show the deliberate and systematic nature of the money laundering operations and Trump's personal involvement in designing and implementing systems specifically intended to evade federal oversight and anti-money laundering regulations. He began reading from what appeared to be email communications between Trump and bank officials that revealed the calculated nature of the criminal enterprise. This email from November of 2017 shows Trump personally instructing Deutsche Bank compliance officers to structure transactions in ways that would avoid triggering suspicious activity reports while still processing large volumes of funds from what he explicitly acknowledges are questionable sources. The email states, quote, "We need to be smarter about how we move these funds so that we don't attract attention from Treasury or the FBI. The business is too important to let government interference destroy our operational flexibility." The chamber erupted into chaos as the full scope of Trump's personal involvement in money laundering operations became clear. The emails suggested not just that his organization had been processing criminal funds, but that he had been personally directing efforts to evade federal detection and oversight while knowingly facilitating criminal activity. The level of criminal intent and systematic deception revealed in the communications represented evidence that would likely support federal prosecution for conspiracy, money laundering, and violation of anti-terrorism financing laws. Trump's attempts to maintain any credibility were increasingly incoherent as the documentary evidence mounted against him. Those emails are completely fabricated and taken out of context. Any legitimate business has to deal with complex financial regulations and compliance requirements that often conflict with practical business needs. Nothing I did was any different from what every successful business owner has to do to navigate an overregulated banking system. Context? Obama produced additional communications that showed the systematic nature of Trump's involvement in criminal financial activities. Donald, this email chain from December of 2018 shows you personally approving specific money laundering techniques and discussing how to avoid detection by federal authorities while processing funds that you explicitly acknowledge come from Russian friends and Mexican business partners who need to clean their investment capital. The communications revealed not just criminal activity, but a level of international criminal networking that suggested Trump's business empire had been functioning as a key node in global organized crime money laundering operations. The national security implications of such relationships were staggering, particularly given Trump's subsequent role as President of the United States and his access to classified intelligence and sensitive government operations. Obama continued reading from the federal investigation files, revealing additional layers of the money laundering operations that demonstrated their scope and sophistication. The investigation found that Trump Organization properties were being used specifically as vehicles for converting criminal proceeds into legitimate assets through real estate transactions that were designed to obscure the criminal origins of the funds, he stated, displaying property transaction records and financial analyses. Criminal organizations would provide funds for property purchases at inflated prices. Trump Organization would facilitate the transactions and take substantial fees, and the properties would then be resold or operated in ways that provided clean money back to the criminal organizations. This system was particularly sophisticated because it used the legitimate real estate market as cover for massive money laundering operations, with individual transactions often involving tens of millions of dollars in criminal proceeds being converted into seemingly legitimate property investments. The investigation identified over 300 individual properties that were involved in money laundering operations, representing billions of dollars in criminal proceeds that were processed through Trump Organization accounts and real estate holdings. But the most shocking aspect of Obama's revelations involved the international scope of the money laundering operations and their implications for American national security during Trump's presidency. The federal investigation found that many of the criminal organizations using Trump Organization money laundering services were connected to foreign intelligence services, including Russian military intelligence and Mexican cartel groups that were actively working against American national security interests, Obama announced to the horrified studio audience. This means that during his presidency, Trump was potentially compromised by criminal organizations that had been using his business empire to launder money for years and who therefore had detailed knowledge of his criminal activities and financial vulnerabilities. The national security implications of this situation are unprecedented in American history and may have influenced key presidential decisions regarding law enforcement, national security, and international relations. The revelation that Trump's money laundering operations had potentially compromised his presidency and influenced his decision-making represented a constitutional crisis that went beyond individual criminal behavior to threaten the fundamental integrity of American democratic institutions and national security apparatus. The possibility that presidential decisions had been influenced by criminal blackmail or coercion represented a level of governmental compromise that would require comprehensive investigation and potentially constitutional remedies. Obama's final revelations involve the ongoing nature of the federal investigation and its current status in terms of potential criminal prosecution. The investigation documented in these files is ongoing and has already resulted in sealed indictments against Trump and 17 other individuals associated with Trump Organization money laundering operations, he announced to the stunned studio. Federal prosecutors are currently preparing what they describe as the largest money laundering prosecution in American history, with potential charges including conspiracy, money laundering, violation of anti-terrorism, financing laws, tax evasion, and operation of a continuing criminal enterprise. The potential penalties for these charges include forfeiture of all assets involved in the money laundering operations, which according to federal analysis would include virtually every property and business interest associated with Trump Organization, as well as prison sentences that could total several decades for the most serious charges. The investigation has also triggered parallel prosecutions in multiple international jurisdictions where Trump Organization operations facilitated money laundering for criminal organizations operating globally. Trump's response to these revelations was a desperate attempt to characterize the entire federal investigation as political persecution rather than legitimate law enforcement activity. This is the greatest witch hunt in American history, designed to destroy someone who threatened the corrupt establishment with actual success and independence. Everything you're showing tonight is fabricated propaganda created by deep state operatives who couldn't accept that the American people chose change over their failed policies. Obama's final statement was delivered with the gravity of someone who understood he was participating in a historic moment of accountability for financial crimes that had operated with impunity for decades while potentially compromising American national security and democratic institutions. Donald, you came here tonight to criticize my economic policies and defend your record as a successful businessman who created wealth and jobs for American workers. You accuse my administration of enabling money laundering while attacking legitimate businesses. He gestured to the federal documentation spread across the debate table. The evidence shows that you have spent 30 years operating what federal prosecutors describe as the largest money laundering enterprise in American history, processing over $50 billion in criminal proceeds from Russian organized crime, Mexican drug cartels, and other criminal organizations that pose direct threats to American national security and public safety. You've used your business empire to facilitate international criminal activity while claiming to represent American values and economic success. Most importantly, you potentially compromise the presidency of the United States by maintaining financial relationships with criminal organizations that could blackmail or coerce you into making decisions that serve their interests rather than American interests. Your business empire represents not economic success, but criminal enterprise that has undermined both American law enforcement and national security while enriching yourself through facilitating the very criminal activity that destroys communities and threatens democratic institutions. The studio erupted in sustained applause from the production crew and limited audience, with everyone present standing to acknowledge what they had witnessed. The applause represented not just approval of Obama's presentation, but recognition that they had witnessed a moment of genuine accountability for financial crimes that had apparently been operating at unprecedented scale, while potentially compromising American governmental institutions. Within hours of the CNN debate, the Department of Justice announced that sealed indictments against Trump and multiple associates would be unsealed and that arrests would begin immediately on charges related to money laundering, conspiracy, and operation of a continuing criminal enterprise. The Treasury Department announced that all Trump Organization assets would be frozen pending forfeiture proceedings related to money laundering activities, and international law enforcement agencies announced parallel prosecutions in multiple countries where Trump Organization operations have facilitated criminal financial activity. The immediate aftermath sent shockwaves throughout American business and political communities, as the revelation that a former president had been operating a massive criminal enterprise while serving in office represented a crisis of democratic governance and institutional integrity that would take years to fully address. Every decision Trump had made during his presidency became subject to review for potential influence by criminal organizations that had been using his business empire for money laundering operations, and multiple congressional investigations were launched to assess the national security implications of presidential compromise by criminal interests. For the American financial system, Trump's exposure represented both vindication of anti-money laundering regulations and proof that even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises could be exposed and prosecuted when federal investigators were given adequate resources and authority. The scandal triggered comprehensive reforms in banking oversight, real estate transaction monitoring, and international financial cooperation designed to prevent similar criminal enterprises from operating within the legitimate financial system. For Obama personally, the decision to present classified federal investigation materials during a public debate represented the most controversial choice of his post-presidential career, but one that he believed was necessary to protect American democratic institutions from ongoing threats posed by criminal influence and governmental compromise. His willingness to break precedent about presidential courtesy and institutional protection demonstrated his commitment to constitutional governance and the rule of law above political considerations. 3 months after the CNN debate, Trump was convicted on multiple federal charges, including money laundering, conspiracy, and operation of a continuing criminal enterprise, receiving a sentence of 45 years in federal prison, along with forfeiture of all assets connected to money laundering operations. His cooperation with ongoing investigations revealed the full scope of international criminal networks that have been using American financial institutions and real estate markets to launder criminal proceeds, leading to prosecutions and asset forfeitures that ultimately recovered over $30 billion in criminal proceeds for victims and law enforcement agencies. The broader impact on American political culture was profound and lasting, as the Trump money laundering scandal forced fundamental reconsiderations of how financial crimes could compromise democratic institutions and how thoroughly background investigations and financial oversight were conducted for elected officials with access to sensitive government operations. The case demonstrated that even the most sophisticated criminal enterprises could be exposed and prosecuted when federal investigators were willing to pursue complex financial investigations regardless of political considerations. 6 months after Trump's conviction and imprisonment, American financial institutions and law enforcement agencies had implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent money laundering operations from compromising legitimate business activities and democratic institutions. The reforms included enhanced beneficial ownership disclosure requirements, real-time transaction monitoring systems, and international cooperation protocols that significantly strengthened the ability of law enforcement to detect and prosecute complex financial crimes before they could reach the scale of the Trump Organization money laundering enterprise. For Deutsche Bank specifically, the revelations about their role in facilitating Trump Organization money laundering operations resulted in massive regulatory penalties, criminal prosecutions of bank executives, and comprehensive restructuring of their compliance and oversight systems under federal supervision. The bank's reputation and business operations were permanently damaged by their involvement in facilitating criminal activity, and they became a cautionary example of how legitimate financial institutions could be compromised by criminal enterprises when proper oversight and ethical standards were abandoned for profitable relationships. As both Obama and American democratic institutions moved forward from the Trump money laundering scandal, the lessons of that July evening in the CNN studio remained as a reminder of both the vulnerability of financial systems to criminal exploitation and the ultimate effectiveness of federal law enforcement when given adequate resources and authority to pursue complex criminal investigations. Obama had shown that protecting democratic institutions sometimes required breaking institutional norms and revealing classified information when the integrity of governmental systems was threatened by criminal compromise. The confrontation between Barack Obama and Donald Trump would be remembered as a defining moment in the ongoing struggle to maintain ethical standards and legal accountability in American business and political leadership. It demonstrated that even the most carefully constructed criminal enterprises could be exposed and prosecuted when their activities threatened democratic institutions and national security interests. Most importantly, it showed that the American legal system remained capable of holding even former presidents accountable for criminal activity when evidence was thoroughly documented and courageously presented by individuals committed to constitutional governance and the rule of law. The investigation and prosecution of Trump Organization money laundering operations became a landmark case in American criminal justice, establishing important precedents about the prosecution of complex financial crimes, the forfeiture of assets involved in criminal enterprises, and the accountability of elected officials whose business activities potentially compromise their governmental responsibilities. The case also demonstrated the critical importance of international cooperation in combating money laundering and the need for comprehensive financial oversight to prevent criminal organizations from exploiting legitimate business structures and democratic institutions. Years after the scandal, the Trump money laundering case continued to influence American policy regarding financial crimes, political accountability, and national security oversight. The comprehensive reforms implemented in response to the scandal significantly strengthened America's ability to detect and prevent similar criminal enterprises while maintaining the legitimate business activities and democratic institutions that define American prosperity and governmental integrity. The case served as a permanent reminder that in a democratic society governed by the rule of law, no individual, regardless of wealth, political power, or public prominence, could operate criminal enterprises with impunity when their activities threatened the fundamental integrity of democratic institutions and the safety of American communities.